Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please leave a comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I still remember the exact sound of that phone ringing. It wasn't loud or urgent, just persistent, buzzing softly against the wooden coffee table, lighting up the dim living room in short, repetitive flashes. My husband, Daniel, had stepped out to take the trash down to the curb. It was a normal evening, quiet, almost peaceful. I had just finished folding laundry, still sitting there on the couch with one of his shirts in my lap, absent-mindedly smoothing out the wrinkles. The phone kept ringing. At first, I ignored it. Daniel was always getting work calls at odd hours, and I didn't like interfering with that part of his life. He was private about his job. Nothing suspicious, just reserved. But then it rang again. And again. 5 times, maybe 6. Something about the insistence made my chest tighten just a little. I picked it up. I wish I hadn't. I didn't even look at the screen long enough to read the name. My mind was already making excuses for why I should answer. Maybe it was important. Maybe it was his boss. Maybe it was something urgent he'd want to know about right away. So I swiped and lifted it to my ear. Hello? There was a pause. Not silence exactly, more like a breath being caught on the other end. Then a woman's voice, soft and familiar in a way that instantly made my stomach drop, said, "Hey, baby, why aren't you answering me?" Everything inside me froze. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My throat closed up so suddenly it felt like I had swallowed something sharp. I pulled the phone away from my ear just enough to glance at the screen. Her name wasn't saved, just a number. But the way she said baby, it wasn't questioning, it wasn't hesitant, it was comfortable, routine, like she had said it 100 times before. "Daniel," she said again, a little laugh in her voice this time. "Don't tell me you're ignoring me now." My hand started trembling. I felt it in my fingers first, then spreading up my arm like a slow electric current. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to pretend this wasn't happening. But something held me there, suspended in that moment, needing to hear more, even if it destroyed me. I think you have the wrong number," I finally managed to say, though my voice didn't sound like mine at all. There was a pause, a longer one this time. Then, quieter now, almost confused, she said, "Who is this?" I swallowed hard. I'm his wife." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just quiet, it was realization settling in, on both ends. "Oh," she whispered. Just that one word, but it carried everything. I waited for her to say something else, an apology, an explanation, a denial, anything. Instead, the line went dead. I stared at the phone for what felt like forever, the screen dimming slowly in my hand. My reflection stared back at me, pale, eyes wide, lips slightly parted like I had forgotten how to breathe. My husband's phone. A stranger calling him baby. And the worst part wasn't even the shock. It was the certainty. Somewhere deep inside me, before I had time to process it logically, I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't some random wrong number or harmless confusion. This was real. And it probably had been real for a long time. The front door creaked open, and I heard Daniel's footsteps coming in. The sound of the trash bin lid slamming shut outside echoed faintly behind him. Normal sounds, everyday sounds, but suddenly they felt foreign, like they belonged to a life I was no longer part of. I quickly set the phone back on the table, exactly where it had been. My hands were still shaking, so I pressed them into my thighs, trying to steady myself. "Hey," he called out casually, kicking off his shoes by the door. "Who kept calling?" I looked up at him, and for the first time in 8 years of our marriage, I didn't recognize the man standing in front of me. "Just a wrong number," I said quietly. The lie came out easier than I expected. He nodded, barely even reacting, and walked into the kitchen like nothing had happened, like everything was still normal, like my world hadn't just cracked open in the span of 30 seconds. I sat there frozen, listening to the sound of him opening cabinets, pouring himself a glass of water, the same routine he followed every night. How many nights had he done this? How many times had that phone lit up when I wasn't looking? How many times had she called him baby when I was just in the next room, completely unaware? The questions came flooding in, one after another, each one heavier than the last. But beneath all of them, there was something else. A quiet, terrifying realization. I didn't actually know my husband anymore. That night, I didn't say anything. I watched him, every movement, every word, every glance. I searched his face for guilt, for hesitation, for anything that might confirm what I already suspected. But he was the same as always, calm, comfortable, unbothered. Too unbothered. And that hurt more than anything, because it meant he had gotten good at this. Later, as we lay in bed, his back turned towards me, I stared at the ceiling in the dark. Sleep felt impossible. My mind kept replaying her voice over and over again. "Hey, baby." The way she said it, the way she didn't hesitate, the way she only went silent after hearing me. Tears slid quietly down the sides of my face, disappearing into the pillow beneath me. I didn't make a sound. I didn't want him to know. Not yet. Because in that moment, I realized something important. If I confronted him right away, he would lie. And I needed the truth, the whole truth, no matter how much it hurt. So instead of breaking down, I made a decision. I would wait. I would watch. And I would find out exactly who that woman was and how long my husband had been living a life behind my back. Because one accidental phone call had just shown me a glimpse of something much bigger. And I had a feeling this was only the beginning. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a second. I kept my breathing slow and steady, pretending to be asleep every time Daniel shifted beside me, but my mind was wide awake, racing through possibilities I didn't want to believe. Every now and then, he'd move slightly, adjusting his pillow or turning over, and each movement made my chest tighten. I wondered if he could feel the distance between us now, or if, to him, nothing had changed at all. By morning, my eyes burned from exhaustion, but I forced myself to get up like it was any other day. Routine. I needed routine. That was the only way I could keep myself from falling apart. I made breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee, the same way I always did. Daniel walked into the kitchen, his hair still messy from sleep, his expression relaxed. He smiled at me. That same smile I had trusted for years. "Morning," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. I flinched. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but I felt it. And for a split second, I saw something flicker across his face. Not guilt, not exactly, more like confusion, like he sensed something was off but couldn't quite place it. "You okay?" he asked, pulling back slightly. I nodded quickly, turning back to the stove. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well." That part wasn't a lie. He hummed softly, accepting the answer without question. Long week. You should rest today if you can. Rest. The word almost made me laugh. Instead, I set his plate down in front of him and poured his coffee, watching him carefully, every movement, every expression. I was searching for cracks now, for anything that didn't line up. But he ate like he always did. Calm, unhurried, comfortable. Too comfortable. His phone buzzed once on the counter. My heart jumped. We both looked at it at the same time. And that's when I saw it. He moved faster than usual. Casual on the surface, but just a second too quick. He picked it up, glanced at the screen, and then flipped it over face down like it was nothing, like it didn't matter, like he hadn't just hidden something from me. Work? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Yeah, he said, not looking at me. Just some updates. Updates. That's what he called it. I nodded slowly, forcing myself to stay calm, but inside, everything was starting to piece together in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. After breakfast, he grabbed his keys and headed for the door. I might be late tonight, he said casually. Got a few things to wrap up. Late. Of course. Okay, I replied softly. He gave me a quick smile, then left. And just like that, I was alone. The silence in the house felt different now, heavier, like it was filled with things I hadn't noticed before. I stood there in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the spot where his phone had been. My hands slowly curled into fists. I could ignore this. I could pretend everything was fine. I could choose not to look deeper, but I knew myself better than that. I needed answers, and if he wasn't going to give them to me, I would find them myself. The first thing I did was sit down on the couch and think. Not react, not panic. Think. If there was another woman, and there was, then there had to be signs, patterns, something I had missed or brushed aside, and slowly, painfully, the memories started coming back. The late nights, the sudden work emergencies, the way he had become more protective of his phone over the past few months. At the time, I told myself it was normal, that marriages go through phases, that people get busy. But now it all looked different. Now it looked like lies. I stood up and walked into the bedroom, my steps slow and deliberate. His side of the room looked exactly the same, nothing out of place, nothing suspicious, but I wasn't looking for obvious anymore. I opened his closet, shirts neatly hung, shoes lined up, everything in order. Too perfect. Then I reached into his jacket pocket, the one he wore most often. Empty. Then his work bag. My hands hesitated for just a moment before I unzipped it. A small part of me still felt like I was crossing a line, like this was wrong. But then I heard her voice again in my head. Hey, baby. And that hesitation disappeared. Inside the bag were his usual things, laptop, charger, a few documents. I searched carefully, trying not to disturb anything too much. And then I found it. A receipt. Folded, tucked into the inner pocket. I unfolded it slowly, my fingers trembling just a little bit. It was at a restaurant. Not just any restaurant, a place we had only gone to once, on our anniversary. My stomach dropped. The date on the receipt was from last week, last Tuesday. I remembered that night. He had told me he was working late. I stared at the receipt, my vision blurring for a moment as the realization settled in. He had taken her there, to our place. Something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a piece of glass breaking somewhere deep inside my chest. I sat down on the edge of the bed, still holding the receipt, trying to steady my breathing. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just a random woman. This was intentional, planned. And suddenly, I didn't just want answers anymore. I needed the truth. Every detail, no matter how much it hurt. because the man I thought I married, the man I trusted with my entire life, was starting to feel like a stranger, and I was done being the only one in the dark. That receipt sat in my hands for a long time. I don't even know how much time passed. Minutes, maybe an hour, long enough for the sunlight coming through the window to shift across the floor, long enough for the quiet in the house to start feeling suffocating. I kept staring at that date. Last Tuesday. I remembered exactly what I was doing that night. I had ordered takeout because he said he'd be too busy to come home. I had eaten alone on the couch watching some random show I couldn't even recall now. I had texted him once, just a simple, "Hope your work isn't too stressful." He replied hours later, "Still here, don't wait up." I didn't question it. I trusted him. And while I was sitting there alone, he was somewhere else, sitting across from another woman, talking, laughing, maybe even holding her hand across the table we once called special. My chest tightened so hard I had to press my hand against it. But I didn't cry. Not yet. Because something inside me had shifted. The sadness was still there, deep and heavy, but it was slowly being pushed aside by something else. Clarity. Cold, sharp clarity. I folded the receipt carefully and slipped it back into his bag exactly the way I had found it. I didn't want him to know I had seen it. Not yet, because now this wasn't just about catching him. This was about understanding the full picture. I stood up, wiped my face even though there were no tears, and walked back into the living room. My mind was already moving ahead, planning. If I confronted him now, he would deny it, or worse, he would admit just enough to make it seem smaller than it really was. A mistake, a one-time thing, a misunderstanding. I had heard those words in other people's stories before. I wasn't going to let that happen to me. No. If I was going to face this, I needed proof, something undeniable, something he couldn't twist or explain away. So I did the one thing I never thought I would do in my marriage. I started watching my husband. Not openly, not obviously, quietly, carefully. That evening, when he came home late just like he said he would, I was ready. I had already made dinner, set the table, created the same normal atmosphere we always had. If he noticed anything different, he didn't show it. "How was your day?" he asked, loosening his tie as he walked in. "Fine," I replied, keeping my tone light. "Busy." He nodded, heading to the bathroom to wash his hands. His phone was in his hand when he walked in, but when he came back out, it wasn't. I noticed. Of course I noticed. "Food smells good," he said, sitting down. "Thanks." We ate in silence for a few minutes. Not uncomfortable, just quiet. The kind of quiet we had shared many times before. But this time, it felt different. Because now I was paying attention to everything. Every glance, every pause, every little shift in his behavior. "So, anything interesting happen at work?" I asked casually, cutting into my food. He shrugged. "Same stuff, meetings, deadlines, nothing exciting." Nothing exciting. I nodded slowly, pretending to accept that answer, even though I knew it was a lie. Because apparently his nothing exciting included dinner with another woman. "Must be exhausting," I said softly. "Yeah," he replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "It is." For a moment, I watched him closely. There it was again, that subtle tension, that slight avoidance in his eyes. If I had known, I might have missed it. But now it stood out like a crack in glass. After dinner, he went straight to the bedroom. I gave it a few minutes before following. He was sitting on the bed, scrolling through his phone. That same phone. My heart started pounding again. I walked in casually, picking up a book from the nightstand like I had all intention of reading. "Long day tomorrow?" I asked. "Yeah," he said without looking up. "Might be even later than today." Of course. "Okay," I said quietly, sitting down on my side of the bed. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched him. His thumb moved quickly across the screen, typing, then pausing, then typing again. A message. To her. I didn't need to see it to know. After a few seconds, his phone buzzed softly in his hand. A reply. His lips curved slightly. A small smile. And that was the moment something inside me hardened, because that smile, it used to be mine. I turned my head slightly, pretending to adjust my pillow, trying to catch a glimpse of the screen without being obvious. But before I could, he locked it and set it face down on the bed. Again, always face down. "Good night," he said, leaning over to turn off the lamp. "Good night," I replied. The room went dark, but my mind stayed wide awake. I lay there staring into the darkness, listening to the sound of his breathing slowly evening out as he drifted off to sleep. And for the first time since all of this started, I felt something stronger than pain. Determination. Because now I wasn't just reacting. I was learning, observing, building a picture piece by piece. And tomorrow I was going to take it one step further, because if there was one thing I knew for sure now, it was that the truth wasn't going to come to me on its own. I had to go get it, and I was ready. The next morning, I didn't wait for him to leave. I woke up before him, quietly slipping out of bed while the room was still wrapped in that soft, early morning silence. My movements were slow, careful, deliberate. I didn't want to wake him, not yet, because today I had a plan. I stood in the kitchen, staring at my reflection in the darkened window as the coffee brewed behind me. My face looked the same, tired, maybe, a little pale, but otherwise unchanged. It was strange how something so big, so life-altering could happen, and the world would still look exactly the same. The coffee machine clicked softly, pulling me back. I poured a cup, wrapping my hands around it for warmth more than anything else. My thoughts were already moving ahead. I needed access to his phone. Not just a glance, not just a suspicion. I needed proof. And for that, I needed time. When Daniel finally came into the kitchen, I was already dressed, sitting at the table like I had been there for a while. "Wow," he said with a small smile. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I replied honestly. He nodded, grabbing a mug and pouring himself coffee. "Same." For a moment, we stood there in silence. Then I said it. "I was thinking I might go out today." He glanced at me briefly. "Oh yeah? Where to?" I shrugged lightly. "Just out. Maybe visit Sarah. It's been a while." That part was true, but it wasn't the real reason. "Sounds good," he said. "You should get out more." The irony of that almost made me laugh. "Yeah," I said softly. "I think I should." He finished his coffee quickly, checked his phone, of course, and then headed off to get ready. I watched him disappear into the bedroom, my mind already ticking. Timing, that was everything. By the time Daniel left the house, I had already made my move. Hey, I called out as he grabbed his keys. Can you take out the trash again? I forgot to put one of the bags out. He paused, a little annoyed but not suspicious. Now? Please, I said gently. It'll just take a second. He sighed lightly, but nodded. Fine. As soon as he stepped outside, I moved. Fast. His phone was on the kitchen counter, unlocked, just sitting there like it always did, because he trusted that I wouldn't touch it. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it was echoing in my ears as I grabbed it. I didn't have time to hesitate. I opened his messages, and there it was. A name, saved this time. Lily, heart. Not even hidden, not even disguised. I tapped it. The conversation opened, and just like that, my entire reality shifted. Miss you already, heart. I can't stop thinking about last night. Wish you didn't have to go home to her. The words blurred for a second as my vision filled with something I still refused to let fall, tears. But I forced myself to focus. Scroll. I kept scrolling. Days, weeks, months. This wasn't new. This wasn't recent. This had been going on a long time. Pictures, messages, plans, memories they had built together while I was still living my life completely unaware. My hand started shaking again, but I didn't stop. I needed to see it all. Then I saw it. A message from him. Dinner at our place tonight? Our place. The same restaurant from the receipt. My chest tightened painfully. And her reply, only if you promise to kiss me the way you did last time, W.I. I couldn't breathe. For a moment, everything around me went silent. The world narrowed down to just that screen in my hands. That truth. Raw, unfiltered, cruel. He wasn't just cheating. He was living another relationship, a full one, with emotions, with routines, with memories, with her. The sound of the front door unlocking snapped me back. Panic surged through me. I quickly locked the phone and placed it back exactly where it had been, stepping away just as he walked in. Got it, he said, brushing his hands together. Anything else? I shook my head, forcing myself to stay calm. No, that's it. Thanks. He grabbed his phone without a second thought, slipping it into his pocket. No suspicion, no hesitation. And that hurt more than anything, because it meant he didn't think he had anything to hide. Or maybe he just didn't think I would ever look. See you tonight. He leaned in to kiss my cheek again. This time I didn't flinch, but I didn't feel anything either. See you, I replied quietly. The door closed behind him, and just like that, the house was silent again. But this time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was clear, sharp, certain. I walked slowly to the couch and sat down, my hands resting in my lap as I stared ahead. Lily. Now she had a name, a place in his life, a role that should have been mine. And the worst part? She knew about me. Wish you didn't have to go home to her. That wasn't confusion. That wasn't a mistake. That was awareness. She knew he was married, and she didn't care. I let out a slow breath, my chest rising and falling as I tried to steady myself. This was real. All of it. And now I had proof. Not just a feeling, not just a suspicion. Proof. But instead of breaking down, instead of crying or screaming right away, I felt something else settle in. Something quiet, something controlled, a decision. Because this wasn't just about catching him anymore. This was about what came next. And for the first time since that phone call, I wasn't just reacting. I was thinking ahead, planning, because if he could lie to me this easily, if he could live this double life without a second thought, then I needed to be smarter, stronger, more careful, because whatever I chose to do next, it had to count. And deep down, I already knew this wasn't going to end quietly. I didn't confront him. That was the first decision I made. And it wasn't because I was weak or scared or unsure of what I had seen. It was because I finally understood something about Daniel that I had never seen so clearly before. He was careful, calculated, the kind of man who would always have an explanation ready, the kind who could twist the truth just enough to make you question your own reality. If I walked up to him with those messages right now, he wouldn't break. He would adjust. He would lie. And somehow he would make me feel like I was the one overreacting. No, I wasn't going to give him that chance. So instead, I did something he would never expect. I stayed quiet. That entire day, I moved through the house like everything was normal. I cleaned, I cooked, I even called Sarah just to keep up appearances. But underneath it all, my mind was working constantly. Lily. That name kept echoing in my head. Who was she? How did they meet? How long had this really been going on? And the most painful question of all, did he love her? I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in my hand, staring at the screen. I had one piece of information, her name. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start. I opened social media, typed it in, Lily. Hundreds of names appeared, different faces, different lives, but I didn't stop because I knew there had to be a connection, something. I thought back to the messages I had seen, the tone, the familiarity, the way they spoke to each other. This wasn't new, which meant there had to be traces, friends, tags, likes, something that linked them together. So I did what I never thought I would do. I searched Daniel's profile, and suddenly, everything started to fall into place. There she was, not hidden, not secret, just subtle, liking his photos, commenting occasionally, nothing obvious, nothing that would raise suspicion if you weren't looking closely. But I was looking closely now, and once I saw her, I couldn't unsee her. She was younger than me, of course she was. Long, dark hair, bright smile, the kind of effortless beauty that didn't try too hard but still caught attention. I stared at her picture for a long time, not out of jealousy, not even out of anger, but out of something deeper. Comparison, the kind that creeps in whether you want it to or not. What did she have that I didn't? What made him choose her? My chest tightened, but I pushed the thought away. This wasn't about her. This was about him, about us, about what he had done. I clicked on her profile, scrolled, photos of her life, friends, family, smiles, and then him. Not directly, not in a way that would scream relationship, but there were hints. A shadow in the background of one photo, a familiar watch on someone's wrist, a reflection in a window that looked just a little too much like him. Careful. They had been careful, but not careful enough. My fingers hovered over the screen. For a moment, I thought about messaging her, asking her directly, "Do you know he's married?" But then I remembered. She already knew. Wish you didn't have to go home to her. The words hit me again, sharp and cold. No, she wasn't the one I needed answers from. She was just part of the betrayal. I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair, staring up at the ceiling. So this was it. This was the truth. My husband had built another life with someone else, right under my nose. And now I had to decide what to do with that truth. I could leave, pack my things, walk away quietly, but something about that didn't sit right with me. Not after everything, not after the lies, the deception, the way he had made me feel like everything was normal while living this double life. No, walking away without a word felt too easy, too incomplete. And that's when the idea started to form, slowly, carefully, a different kind of plan. Not loud, not dramatic, but deliberate. because if there was one thing Daniel valued, it was control. And for the first time in a long time, I realized something. I didn't have to give him that anymore. That evening when he came home, I greeted him the same way I always did. A soft smile, a quiet, "How was your day?" And he answered the same way too, like nothing had changed, like everything was still perfect. We had dinner together, talked about small things, normal things, and all the while, he had no idea that I knew everything, that I had seen the messages, that I knew her name, her face, her place in his life. And as I watched him sit across from me laughing lightly on TV later that night, I felt something shift inside me. Not sadness, not anger, but something colder, stronger. Acceptance. Because this wasn't the man I married, and whatever came next wasn't going to be about saving this marriage. It was going to be about ending it on my terms. That night, I couldn't stop looking at him. Not openly, not in a way he would notice, but every time he turned his head, every time he laughed at something on the television, every time he casually reached for his phone, I studied him like a stranger, because that's what he had become, a stranger living in my house, sharing my table, sleeping in my bed. And I wondered how long it had taken for him to become this version of himself, this man who could lie so easily, so naturally, without even blinking. At some point, I got up and went to the kitchen to wash the dishes. The sound of running water filled the silence between us. It used to feel comforting, routine, familiar. Now it just felt like noise I used to trust. Behind me, I could hear him on his phone again. Soft taps on the screen, a faint smile in his voice when he said, "I'll call you later." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Lily. Always Lily. I dried my hands slowly, carefully, like I had all the time in the world, because tonight I wasn't going to react. I was going to observe. That was my strength now. By the time I returned to the living room, he had already put his phone away. "Work stuff?" I asked casually. "Yeah," he said. "Nothing serious." Nothing serious. The same lie, the same comfort. I nodded and sat down beside him on the couch, keeping a small space between us, enough distance to breathe, enough distance to think. "You've been working late a lot lately," I said softly, watching the screen instead of him. He exhaled lightly. "Yeah, things have been crazy." "Must be important." "Very," he said. A pause. Then he leaned back, stretching his arms. "But it's slowing down soon." I almost smiled at that. Soon. That word suddenly felt like a joke, because I knew something he didn't. There was no slow down. There was only exposure or escape, and I was deciding which one he would get. Later that night, when we were in bed, I lay awake again listening to his breathing. This time it came easier to recognize his patterns, the small shifts, the rhythm, the comfort. He slept like a man without secrets, but I knew better now. At around 2 a.m., his phone buzzed. Once. Soft. Barely noticeable. His hand moved immediately in his sleep, instinctively reaching for it. And I saw it. That reflex, that habit, that dependency. But he didn't fully wake, just turned slightly, pulling the phone closer before settling again. I waited, counted the seconds. 10, 20, 30. Then I slowly reached over, careful, silent, and I took it. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would wake him, but he didn't move. I slid out of bed quietly and walked into the bathroom, closing the door behind me without a sound. Only then did I unlock it, and what I saw changed everything again. Not just messages this time, calls, dozens of them, missed calls from Lily, late night calls, early morning calls, calls labeled "miss you," calls labeled "come over," calls that had happened while I was asleep right next to him. My fingers tightened around the phone, but I didn't stop there. I opened the call logs, and then I saw something that made my stomach twist harder than before. A pattern. Every Thursday night, every single week, same time, same duration, same contact. It wasn't random. It wasn't emotional chaos. It was scheduled, planned, a routine, like a second life built into his calendar. I leaned against the bathroom sink, staring at the screen, my reflection faint in the mirror behind it. This wasn't an affair, not in the messy, accidental way I had tried to believe at first. This was structured, maintained, protected, and that meant something worse. It meant intention. I quietly scrolled further, and then I found something that made my breath catch. A saved note. Just a short one, but enough. Don't forget, Friday, booked hotel again, same room. My hand trembled. Hotel? So it wasn't just dinners, not just messages. They had a place, a private place, a place that existed outside of me completely. I closed my eyes for a second, forcing myself to breathe. In, out, slow, because I realized something important in that moment. If I kept waiting, I would never get the full truth, because the full truth wasn't in messages. It wasn't in receipts. It wasn't even in his behavior at home. It was out there, in that hotel room, in that Thursday night routine. And if I wanted the complete picture, I would have to see it with my own eyes. I locked the phone and stepped back into the bedroom. He was still asleep, still peaceful, still unaware that I now knew everything. I slid the phone back exactly where it was and lay down again, staring at the ceiling. But sleep didn't come, because my decision was already forming. I would go, not to confront him, not to scream, but to witness, to confirm, to understand the final layer of the life he had built without me. And once I had that, everything would change. I just didn't know yet how much. I didn't tell him I knew. I didn't even hint at it. The next morning, I moved through the house like I always did, calm, quiet, predictable. I made breakfast, poured his coffee, asked him about his day, and he responded the same way he always had, like everything was normal, like he wasn't living a completely different life behind my back. But now, every word he spoke felt hollow. Every smile felt rehearsed. Every touch felt like something I no longer recognized. "Got another late one tonight," he said casually, grabbing his jacket. Thursday. Of course it was. My heart didn't race this time. It didn't drop or twist or break. It just settled. Because now I knew exactly what that meant. "Okay," I said softly, not even looking up. He hesitated for a second, like he was waiting for something. Maybe a reaction, maybe a question. But I gave him nothing. And eventually, he just nodded and walked out the door. The moment it closed behind him, I exhaled slowly. This was it. No more guessing, no more wondering. Today, I would see the truth with my own eyes. I got ready more carefully than usual, not for him, not for anyone else, but for myself. I chose something simple, neutral, something that wouldn't draw attention but still made me feel steady. Because I needed to be steady. This wasn't going to be easy. By the time evening came, I was already in my car, parked a short distance away from the hotel listed in his note. I had arrived early, too early, but I didn't want to risk missing anything. The building stood tall and quiet, its glass windows reflecting the fading light of the sky. It looked normal, ordinary, just a hotel. But to me, it felt like the center of everything that had been hidden from me. My hands rested on the steering wheel, gripping it lightly as I watched the entrance. Minutes passed, then more. Every car that pulled in made my heart skip, but I stayed still, watching, waiting. And then I saw him. Daniel, my husband. He stepped out of his car like this was just another routine stop. Calm, collected, not a trace of hesitation in his movements. And then she appeared, Lily, walking toward him from the opposite side of the entrance. For a moment, everything slowed. I watched as they closed the distance between them, watched as his face changed, that smile, that real smile, the one I hadn't seen in months. And then he reached for her, not awkwardly, not uncertainly, but naturally, like it was the most normal thing in the world. His hand slid around her waist, pulling her close, and she leaned into him like she belonged there, like she had done it 100 times before. I couldn't breathe, not because I was shocked, but because I was finally seeing it, all of it, not through messages, not through assumptions, but in real life, in front of me. They weren't just two people having an affair. They looked like a couple, comfortable, familiar, connected. And that hurt more than anything else. They laughed about something as they walked inside together, disappearing through the glass doors like it was nothing, like I didn't exist, like our marriage didn't exist. I sat there in the car staring at the entrance long after they were gone, waiting, thinking, feeling something shift inside me again, because the pain I expected to feel, it didn't come the way I thought it would. There were no tears, no panic, no urge to run after them or confront them. Instead, there was clarity, a quiet, undeniable clarity. This wasn't something that could be fixed. This wasn't something that could be talked through or forgiven or explained away. This was a choice, his choice, made over and over again. Every message, every dinner, every Thursday night, every lie. And now that I had seen it with my own eyes, there was nothing left to question. I started the car slowly, my movements calm, controlled. I didn't stay. I didn't need to, because I had already seen everything I needed to see. On the drive home, the city lights blurred slightly through my windshield, but I didn't feel lost. If anything, I felt more grounded than I had in days, because now I knew exactly where I stood, and more importantly, I knew what I was going to do next. By the time I walked back into the house, the silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt empty, like something had already ended, even if the final words hadn't been spoken yet. I walked into the bedroom, looked around slowly, taking in every detail. The bed, the dresser, the life we had built together. And for the first time, I didn't feel attached to it. I felt separate from it, like I was already stepping away. Because the truth was, I just watched my marriage from the outside, and it didn't look like something I wanted to stay in anymore. I sat down on the edge of the bed, letting out a slow breath. Tomorrow, everything would change. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally understood something I hadn't before. I deserved more than this. And for the first time, I was ready to take it. The next morning felt different. Not in the way I had expected, with tears or heaviness or some dramatic sense of loss, but with a strange, quiet calm, the kind that comes after a storm has already passed, even if the damage is still there. I woke up before Daniel again, but this time I didn't feel restless. I felt certain. There was no more guessing, no more doubt, no more hoping I had misunderstood something. I had seen it, and once you see something like that with your own eyes, there's no going back to who you were before. I got out of bed and started my day like usual, but everything felt more deliberate now. Every movement had intention behind it. Every choice felt like it mattered, because now I wasn't just living in this life, I was preparing to leave it. Daniel came into the kitchen a little later, stretching as he walked in, his expression relaxed. "Morning," he said, reaching for the coffee. "Morning," I replied. I watched him quietly as he poured himself a cup, completely unaware of what I had done the night before, of what I had seen. "Long night?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He sighed, shaking his head slightly. "Yeah, you could say that." I held his gaze for just a second longer than usual. "I'm sure you could." Something flickered across his face. Brief, almost invisible, but it was there. A moment of hesitation, a crack, and then it was gone. He looked away, taking a sip of his coffee. "Work's been crazy." There it was again, the lie. But this time, it didn't hurt. It just sounded empty. I nodded slowly. "You've been saying that a lot lately." He shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "Because it's true." I didn't respond. I didn't argue. I didn't expose him, because I wasn't ready yet. Not until everything was in place. That day I started making quiet changes, small ones. On the surface they looked normal, harmless, but each one was a step towards something bigger. I gathered my important documents, my ID, bank papers, anything tied to my name, and placed them neatly in a folder. I checked our accounts, memorizing details, making sure I understood exactly where everything stood. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I didn't trust him anymore. I packed a small bag, nothing obvious, just a few essentials, enough for a few days, just in case. Every action I took felt surreal, like I was watching myself from a distance, but underneath it all, there was no panic, just focus. That evening, when Daniel came home, I greeted him the same way I always did, and he responded the same way too, like nothing had changed. We sat down for dinner again, the same routine playing out like a script we both knew by heart, but this time I decided to change one line. "Daniel?" I said softly, setting my fork down. He looked up. "Yeah?" I held his gaze. "Are you happy?" The question hung in the air between us. Simple, direct, but loaded with everything I wasn't saying. He blinked, clearly caught off guard. "What kind of question is that?" he asked, letting out a small laugh. "A real one," I replied. He leaned back slightly, studying me now. "Of course I am. Why wouldn't I be?" I tilted my head just a little. "I don't know," I said quietly. "You just seem distant lately." There was a pause, and for a moment I saw it again. That flicker, that discomfort. But just like before, he covered it. "I'm just tired. Work's been a lot." Work. Always work. I nodded slowly, as if I believed him, but inside, I was already letting go. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I turned away from him, staring at the wall instead of the ceiling this time, because I didn't need to wonder anymore. I didn't need to question. I didn't need to search for answers. I already had them. And now, all that was left was the ending. But it wouldn't be his ending. It would be mine, and I would choose how it happened. The next morning, I made a call. Not to him, not to Lily, but to someone else, someone I trusted. "Hey," I said softly when she picked up. "Can I stay with you for a few days?" There was no hesitation on the other end. "Of course," she said immediately. And just like that, the final step had begun. The moment I ended that call, everything felt real. Not in the abstract, distant way it had before, but in a grounded, undeniable way. There was no more maybe, no more what if, no more waiting for the right time. The right time had arrived the moment I saw him with her. Now, I was just catching up to that reality. I didn't tell Daniel about the call. I didn't tell him about the bag I had quietly packed, tucked away at the back of the closet where he would never think to look. I didn't tell him that I had already started separating myself from him in ways he hadn't even noticed yet. Because the truth was, he hadn't been paying attention for a long time. That day, I moved through the house slowly, taking in everything one last time, not with sadness, but with awareness. The couch where we used to sit together on quiet evenings, the kitchen where we had shared countless meals, the small details, like the way the light hit the window in the afternoon or the faint creak in the hallway floor. It was strange how a place could hold so many memories and yet feel so empty at the same time. By the afternoon, I had everything ready. Documents, clothes, essentials, nothing excessive, just enough to leave without looking back. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, my hands resting in my lap, my mind steady. I thought I would feel something stronger at this point, grief, anger, fear, but instead there was just clarity. Because somewhere along the way, without even realizing it, I had already started letting go. That evening, Daniel texted me, "Running late again, don't wait up." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "Okay." Simple, neutral, final. Because this time, I wasn't waiting. As the sun began to set, I stood in the living room one last time. I didn't cry, I didn't hesitate. I just looked around. And then I picked up my bag, walked to the door, and left. No note, no explanation, no confrontation, because I knew something he didn't. This silence, it would say more than any argument ever could. The drive to my friend's house felt longer than it actually was, not because I was unsure, but because every mile created more distance between who I used to be and who I was becoming. When I arrived, she opened the door before I even knocked. Her eyes softened the moment she saw me. "You don't have to explain anything right now," she said gently. And for the first time in days, I felt something close to relief. I stepped inside, setting my bag down, letting the weight of everything I had been carrying finally ease just a little. That night, I slept. Not perfectly, not peacefully, but enough. Enough to feel like I could breathe again. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing. Daniel, of course. I stared at his name on the screen as it rang. Once, twice, 3 times. I didn't answer. A message came through. "Where are you?" Another one. "Why aren't you home?" And then another. "What's going on?" I read each one slowly, my expression calm, because for the first time, he didn't have control of the situation anymore. Hours passed, more calls, more messages, each one a little more urgent than the last. "Please call me. Are you okay? Did something happen?" I could almost hear his shift in his voice through the words. Confusion, concern, panic. The same panic I had felt when I first heard her call him baby. But this time, it wasn't mine. It was his. And I let him sit in it. Not out of cruelty, not out of revenge, but because this was the truth. Unfiltered, unavoidable. By the evening, I finally responded. Just one message. "I know about Lily." That was it. No anger, no accusations, no explanation. Just the truth. His reply came almost instantly. "What?" Then another. "What are you talking about?" And then, "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, my heart steady, my mind clear. For a moment, I thought about everything he might say, the excuses, the lies, the attempts to minimize what he had done. But then I remembered the hotel, the way he held her, the way he smiled, and I realized something important. There was nothing left to talk about, so I typed one final message. No. I hit send, and just like that, the chapter I had been living in for years closed. Not with a fight, not with chaos, but with a quiet, undeniable ending. And for the first time since this all began, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The silence after that message was louder than anything we had ever said to each other. I didn't block him. I didn't turn off my phone. I just let it sit there beside me, screen dark, while I stared out the window of my friend's living room. The world outside moved like nothing had changed. Cars passing by, people walking, life continuing. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to keep up with it. My phone buzzed again, and again, and again, but I didn't pick it up because I already knew what was on the other side of those messages. Confusion, excuses, desperation, maybe even regret. But none of it mattered anymore because regret doesn't erase choices, and he had made his over and over again. Later that evening, I finally looked. Dozens of messages, some short, some long, some that started to sound less like confusion and more like panic. I don't understand what you think you saw. It's not what you think. Please just talk to me. And then I made a mistake. I stared at that one for a long time. A mistake. That word again. The same one I had expected from the beginning. But now that I had seen everything, it sounded almost insulting. Because a mistake is something accidental, something you didn't mean to do. But this was planned, repeated, protected. There was nothing accidental about it. I locked my phone again and set it aside. I wasn't angry, and that surprised me because I thought I would be. I thought I would feel rage, betrayal burning through me, the need to confront him, to demand answers, to make him understand what he had done. But instead, I felt distant, like I had already stepped outside of that version of my life. The next morning, I woke up early again, but this time, it wasn't out of habit. It was because my mind was already moving forward. I made coffee in my friend's kitchen, the unfamiliar space grounding me in a strange way. This wasn't my home, but it was safe. And right now, that mattered more. As I stood there holding the warm cup in my hands, I thought about everything that had happened over the past few days. The phone call, the messages, the hotel, the lies, and then the silence. My silence, because that had been my choice, and it had changed everything. Around mid-morning, my phone rang again. Daniel. I watched it light up the screen, watched his name appear, and for a moment, I considered answering, not because I wanted to go back, not because I needed closure, but because I wanted to see if he would finally tell the truth. But then I realized something. The truth had already been shown to me, not through his words, but through his actions. And actions don't need explanation. So I let the phone ring and then stop. A few minutes later, another message came through. I'm outside. My heart paused for just a second. Outside. Of course he was. I walked slowly to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see. And there he was, standing by his car, looking different. Not calm, not confident, but unsettled. Like the control he had always relied on was gone. Like he didn't know what to do next. And for the first time, I saw him the way he really was. Not the man I had built in my mind, not the version I had loved for years, but the reality. A man who had choices and chose to lie. A man who had a life and chose to risk it. a man who had me and chose someone else. I let the curtain fall back into place. I didn't go outside. I didn't call him. I didn't give him what he wanted, because this wasn't about punishing him. It was about choosing myself. After a while, his car was gone. And just like that, so was the last piece of something I had been holding on to without realizing it. That need for answers, that need for closure. Because closure doesn't come from someone else. It comes from the moment you decide you've had enough. That afternoon, I sat down with my friend, and for the first time, I told someone everything. Not in fragments, not in pieces, but the whole story. And as the words left my mouth, I felt lighter. Not because it erased the pain, but because I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. "You did the right thing," she said softly. I nodded, not because I needed reassurance, but because I already knew. That night, as I lay in a bed that wasn't mine, in a life that was slowly becoming something new, I realized something. I hadn't lost everything. I had lost an illusion. And in its place, I had found something real. Myself. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. Not empty, just calm in a way that felt unfamiliar at first. Daniel kept trying. Calls, messages, even a few emails. Long ones this time, carefully written, explaining things, reframing things. I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened. I was going to end it. "I still love you." I read them once, all of them, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to be sure there was nothing left inside me that still believed him. And when I finished, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no pull to respond, because the words didn't match the reality I had already seen. And once you see the truth clearly, words lose their power. I didn't reply. Instead, I started focusing on the things that actually mattered now. Finding stability, creating space, rebuilding something that felt like mine. I met with a lawyer, not dramatically, not emotionally, just practically. We talked about next steps, about separation, about how to handle everything in a way that protected me. And as I sat there, listening, asking questions, making decisions, I realized something quietly powerful. I wasn't falling apart. I was rebuilding, one decision at a time. A few days later, Daniel stopped reaching out as much. Not completely, but enough for me to notice. And I understood why. Because silence answers things too. It tells you when someone realizes they've lost control, when they realize they can't fix something with words anymore, and maybe when they realize what they've actually lost. But by then, I had already moved forward. One afternoon, I found myself standing in front of a mirror again, the same way I had days ago. But this time, I looked different. Not physically, but in the way I held myself, in the way I looked at my own reflection. There was no confusion in my eyes anymore, no searching, just clarity, strength, and something else, peace. Because I finally understood something I wish I had known much earlier. Love doesn't look like secrecy. Love doesn't look like lies. And it definitely doesn't look like someone making you feel like you're not enough while giving everything to someone else. That's not love. That's betrayal. And I deserved better than that. Weeks passed. Life slowly started to take shape again. New routines, new spaces, new moments that didn't include him. And while there were still quiet moments, moments where memories would surface unexpectedly, they didn't break me anymore. They just reminded me of how far I had come. One evening, I was sitting by the window watching the sunset, the sky painted in soft shades of orange and gold, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was okay, because I faced something painful and I didn't let it destroy me. I let it change me in the best way. And sometimes I think back to that moment, the phone call, the voice on the other end saying, "Hey, baby." At the time, it felt like the worst thing that could have happened, like the beginning of everything falling apart. But now, I see it differently. It wasn't the end of my life, it was the beginning of my truth. Because if I hadn't answered that call, I might still be living in a lie, still loving someone who didn't respect me, still ignoring the signs I was too afraid to face. But I did answer it, and it changed everything. It gave me clarity, it gave me strength, and eventually, it gave me freedom. So if you're listening to this right now and you've ever found yourself questioning your worth because of someone else's choices, don't, because their betrayal is not a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of their character. And one day, you'll look back at your own moment, your turning point, and realize the same thing I did. You didn't lose them. They lost you. And that is where your new life begins.